Episode 5, The Big Boys.
Adam, what happened after you were arrested?
Wade said through the speaker, calm and deliberate. The fluorescent light above me hummed in the booth, a fixed, indifferent note. In my mind, I am still standing in that holding room.
Face the wall, hands behind your back, feet shoulder-width apart.
The wall is beige, scuffed at forehead height where other men had waited before me. An officer pats me down. Arms, ribs, waistband, thighs, calves, ankles. Not violent, not angry, just thorough, as if thoroughness were its own virtue.
Spread your feet.
They wrap a thick leather belt around my waist and thread a metal chain through it. My wrists are cuffed and fastened to the belt, so my hands rest awkwardly against my stomach, like a man in prayer who has forgotten what he is praying for. Then they crouch and secure the leg irons around my ankles, metal on both sides, a short chain between them. They tug each restraint twice. When your feet are cuffed, walking becomes negotiation. The officer who had been vaping stands a few feet away. The smell of synthetic fruit lingers in the air. Mango, maybe, or something engineered to approximate it. He glances down the hallway and says it almost conversationally, the way someone might announce a shift change.
The big boys are coming.
I want to ask what that means. I do not. Some things you learn to understand in the moment you encounter them. Two larger officers enter. Heavier boots, a quieter kind of presence. The quiet of men who no longer need to explain themselves. One of them grips the chain at my waist. Before they move me, I turn slightly toward the vaping officer. "Do you like what you do?" I ask him. He studies me for a moment, expression unchanged.
It's my job.
No pride, no apology, just employment. He takes another pull from the vape pen. Metal clicks against concrete as they guide me forward. That morning, I had worn a tailored suit and brown Louis Vuitton shoes. By afternoon, I move in 6-inch increments, learning the geometry of constraint. They load us into a van with no windows. The door shuts. Darkness. The engine turns over somewhere ahead of us, and the van begins to move before anyone speaks. When your ankles are shackled, you feel every bump in the road. When your hands are fixed to your waist, you feel every shift in balance. You cannot brace yourself. You cannot catch yourself. You only wait. The van smelled faintly of rubber and disinfectant. We sat on narrow metal benches facing each other, wrists cuffed to the chain at our waists, ankles linked by short irons that made every movement deliberate. The engine vibrated through the floor. There were no real windows in the back, just a small grated panel near the ceiling where a slice of daylight slipped in and disappeared every time we turned. Across from me sat the man who was shaking in the cell. He looked remarkably comfortable. Lean, relaxed, like someone who had already accepted the rules of the room. When he smiled, several of his teeth caught the dim light. Gold. Not subtle gold either, a confident amount of gold. He noticed me staring.
First time?
I hesitated. Is it that obvious? He leaned back against the metal wall, amused.
Yeah, you still sitting like you think this is temporary.
I looked down at the chain running from my wrist to the belt around my waist. I assume it is. He shrugged.
Everything temporary. Some things just repeat.
The van hit a bump. The chains shifted and clinked softly.
Where you from?
Egypt. He nodded thoughtfully.
Nice. Me, Jamaica.
His accent had the warm rhythm of the islands. Even inside a transport van, it carried a kind of sunlight. How long have you been in the U.S.? I asked. He smiled again.
Well, this trip?
This trip?
Yeah.
He lifted his cuffed hand slightly.
This my 4th deportation.
I stared at him. 4th? He nodded calmly.
They sent me back 3 times already.
And you came back.
Of course I come back.
He said it with the calm certainty of someone explaining gravity. That seems inefficient. He laughed loudly, gold flashing in the dim light.
My friend, life is inefficient.
He said, leaning forward slightly. The van rattled through an intersection. Why keep coming back? I asked. He thought about it for a moment.
My children here, they born here.
Then he smiled again.
And also the food.
The food?
Yes,
What's wrong with the food in Jamaica?
nothing wrong with Jamaican food. Jamaican food perfect.
He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was revealing a secret.
But the jerk chicken in Brooklyn? That thing worth crossing borders for.
I laughed. You realize jerk chicken is Jamaican.
Yes, but the jerk chicken in Brooklyn come with my kids.
That logic sat quietly between us. The van slowed. He studied me for a moment.
You different though.
How so?
You look like you still trying to understand what happening.
I am. He nodded.
That phase passed.
I looked down at the iron around my ankles. What comes after it? He leaned back against the wall again.
Routine.
The word landed heavier than the chains. I watched the metal floor vibrate with the road beneath us. That is exactly what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, that part.
He nodded slowly. The van slowed. The first thing visible was the fencing. Chain link, tall and doubled. The upper edge threaded with coils of razor wire. Cameras mounted on poles watched the approach road with mechanical patience. Beyond the perimeter sat the building. Delaney Hall. The name appeared in large serif letters above a pale arch at the front of a long rectangular structure. The architecture was purely functional. Brown concrete walls, rows of square glass block windows running along the upper level. The building's windows were made of thick glass blocks, a design popular in mid-century industrial architecture because it allowed light in while preventing anyone from seeing out. The van passed through the outer gate. A barrier arm lifted after a brief pause at the guard booth. Inside the perimeter, the scale of the facility became clearer. More fencing, more wire. No flags, no signage welcoming anyone. Sections of the building connected by long, curved corridors enclosed in chain link. Every passage contained within another barrier. A parking strip ran along one side of the compound. Government sedans and SUVs parked in orderly rows. Nothing personal. Near the entrance, a few officers stood beside the gate in tactical vests, radios clipped to their shoulders. Their posture suggested routine rather than urgency. Delaney Hall had been repurposed several times over the years. Corrections, re-entry, treatment, immigration detention, which suggested the building itself was less concerned with the legal category of its occupants than with their continued presence. The van rolled to a stop near the intake entrance. From the window, the door opened. The air smelled faintly of metal and old dampness, and the building remained exactly as it had been designed to be, still. Inside, the restraints remain: waist chain, wrist cuffs, leg irons. We are walked into intake like inventory being logged. The officers wear blue uniforms with white letters across the chest: GEO. A private company contracted to operate the detention center. Not correctional officers in the cinematic sense, civilians in institutional blue, clocking in and clocking out, the way most people do. The intake officer sits behind a reinforced plastic counter. He is morbidly obese, so large that standing appears optional. His chair creaks when he shifts. When he leans forward to remove the chains, it looks like effort. Metal lands on the counter piece by piece, a small ceremony of undoing. Intake takes 12 hours. 12 hours on molded plastic benches. 12 hours under fluorescent light. 12 hours of being reduced to entries in a system that will not remember your face, only your number. In 1651, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes published a book called Leviathan. The illustration on its cover shows a giant king rising above a city. If you look closely, the king is not a man. His body is made of thousands of tiny people standing shoulder to shoulder. Hobbes' argument was simple. The state is not a person. It is a machine assembled from ordinary individuals. No single one controls it, but once the machine begins moving, it moves with enormous weight. Here, Geo is one of the gears. The men and women in blue are the teeth on that gear. They did not design the cogs, but their hands keep them turning. Their wages are paid per body, per bed, per day. The intake form, the log book, the 12 hours of waiting are not errors, they are features. Time stretches because time is billable. Prolonged detention becomes a kind of currency, traded in days. The Jamaican man with gold teeth leaned over and said,
You know this place makes money off you, right?
Most businesses do, I replied. He laughed.
No, I mean literally. Every night you sleep here, somebody gets paid.
Later I checked. He wasn't wrong. It took a few weeks before I understood how the place actually worked. At first the system felt abstract, like weather. Officers rotated shifts. Buses arrived at odd hours. Men disappeared overnight. Geo was one of the two largest private, for-profit prison contractors in the United States. Immigration detention was not a small part of its business. It was central to it. In 2022 alone, the company earned more than $1 billion from ICE contracts. The contracts were structured around something called bed days. Each occupied bed generated revenue for every day it remained filled. Empty beds produced nothing. In corporate filings, the company projected roughly $3 billion in annual revenue by 2026, driven largely by immigration detention. The financial logic was simple enough. The longer someone stayed in a bed, the more valuable that bed became. What surprised me more was the second layer of the system. Companies that depend on detention also invest heavily in the policies that create detention. Geo spent millions on lobbying around immigration enforcement and deportation policy. In 2017 alone, the company increased its lobbying expenditures by more than 70%, focusing on issues tied directly to detention and removal. None of this was hidden. It appeared openly in filings, disclosures, and investor reports. The language of the filings was clinical. Growth, capacity, utilization rates. None of the documents mentioned the men sitting in the intake room that afternoon. But the logic of the system was suddenly easy to understand. A detention center does not measure time the way the outside world does. Time here is revenue. The intake officer begins typing. Name, date of birth, country, alien number. The keys click steadily into the silence. Another Geo officer stands nearby. She looks at me, not at my face, but at the suit.
What'd you do for a living?
The question is not curiosity, it is calibration. I spent my time trying to understand why human cells sometimes forget the rules, I replied. She looks down at my shoes.
Those probably cost more than I make in a month.
She looks away. Not anger, not envy, just a quiet measurement. The kind people make when the distance between two lives becomes briefly, unavoidably visible. Metal clicks continue behind the counter. The intake cell had a television bolted high in the corner, sealed behind a scratched plastic case the color of weak tea. The volume was low, but the captions ran clearly enough. White letters sliding across the bottom of the screen with the composed authority of people who have never once doubted themselves. The world, according to the television, was collapsing in several different places at once. There were reports from Gaza, buildings turned into dust, entire neighborhoods reduced to geometry and smoke. The anchor spoke of airstrikes, starving children, hospitals barely functioning, families searching through concrete for bodies. One commentator called it necessary defense. Another called it catastrophe. The footage looked the same either way. Then a commercial for pickup trucks. Down in the intake cell, 12 men sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to be processed into the machinery of the United States immigration system. There was not enough bench. There was not enough air. Someone's knee pressed against someone else's knee, and no one apologized because there was nothing to apologize for. This was just the geometry of the room, and you inhabited it. Inside the cell, the most urgent geopolitical question was whether the officer would bring more toilet paper. War on the screen, waiting in the room. And between the two, the quiet realization that certainty is usually much louder than truth. During intake, I meet a Pakistani man who speaks fluent Spanish. He arrives with a group of Hispanic detainees who are laughing. Not hysterically, not desperately, just casually, as if this is familiar terrain, as if they are waiting for a delayed flight rather than their lives. The Pakistani man has tattoos and calm eyes, the calm of someone who has already survived several versions of this. We speak quietly, in the margins of the room. He tells me he once worked for Osama bin Laden, that he had been close to Ayman al-Zawahiri. He says the names evenly, without mythology, the way someone references former employers. He tells me he left years ago, migrated to Brazil, then to the United States. Now he operates smoke shops in Jersey. ICE picked him up after a fight in Jersey City. Eventually, ID cards are printed. Blue and orange, low risk. Yellow, moderate. Red, high risk. Watching the colored cards appear on the counter, I think about the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus, who in the 18th century tried to solve a problem that had frustrated scientists for centuries. Nature was chaotic, thousands of plants, animals, and organisms existing in endless variation. So he imposed order, genus, species, family. Suddenly, the living world could be organized into clean categories printed neatly in books. It worked beautifully, but the system had a quiet consequence. Once something received a label, people stopped looking at the thing itself. They just looked at the label. Mine is red. The Pakistani man is yellow. We exchange a brief glance. The system has made its assessment, rendered its verdict in color, and moved on to the next name. We are issued 3 red shirts, 3 blue pants, 3 pairs of underwear, shower shoes, a toothbrush, and a small radio. Inventory for indefinite waiting. An escorting officer gathers several of us.
Unit 5.
He starts walking.
Unit 5 is the worst.
Not threatening, informational. As if he had said, "Rain today, bring an umbrella." By then, fear had dulled into something else. Not acceptance, but a fatigue so complete it resembled calm. I have been awake nearly 20 hours. I have been shackled at the waist and ankles. I have been processed for half a day. I have been reduced to a color. For me, Unit 5 sounds like a mattress. The memory tightens. The fluorescent hum returns. I am back in the court booth. Wade watches me carefully.
What happened after the transfer?
The judge's blue eyes lift from the file. I sit upright. I was transported to Delaney Hall, I say. Processed. Classified as high risk. Assigned to Unit 5. The judge writes something down. Wade pauses.
And what was Unit 5?
I look at the lens. It was where they put the men they were not sure they could control. A silence follows. Wade nods once.
And what happened there, Adam?
I breathe in. That was the first night I understood why they called them the big boys. Most people will never see the inside of an immigration detention center. Out of the Valley's shadow offers a rare glimpse into what that system actually feels like from the inside. If this episode stayed with you, share it with someone who should hear it. Follow Out of the Valley's shadow wherever you listen.